I asked her what kind of a church she went to. She says, well, it's a Baptist church. And it was a larger, independent, fundamental Baptist church. And I said, well, like my church is a garb church, She thought that meant we wore funny clothes. Well, that is not the case. Stands for General Association of Regular Baptist Churches, or now Regular Baptist Ministries. And our church has been a part of that for decades and decades. My home church was a part of that. And I have had the privilege of serving on the governing council or board of that group since 2007, along with a pastor by the name of David Strope for many of those years. Well, Pastor David Strope, who pastored in New York and then in Iowa, is now Dr. David Strope, and he is the interim, which usually means a short time. We don't know how long this is going to last. Interim national representative. The GARBC is not over us. They're not in charge of us. He's not my boss. I mistakenly started to call you my boss this morning. Actually, I'm one of his bosses. He represents us, and he's going to tell us about the GARBC tonight. Does that mean we wear funny clothes? No. Dr. David Strope, come share with us. We served together in Baptist Mid-Missions Council. We've become friends over the years. Wonderful, wonderful, godly man. Great to have you here today.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you, Pastor Alexander. We are friends, so if you need to scoop on Pastor, you let me know, and I can probably fill you in on a few things. But it is a great delight to be at First Regular Baptist Church of Wellington. And when I travel, I communicate what in the world is a regular Baptist. And so to this crowd, it will be surely only review. And really look forward to just sharing a few things with you. Just a few, I'll weave some personal things in, and just, I don't want this merely to be a report about what we do. I want to share a bit of a testimony about what God has done in my life, in our life as a ministry couple. What God is even yet doing in and through our churches and the ministry that He has called us to. This is my beloved bride. If you think on her, she's not feeling well today of all things. She's sick in bed back home. But she is, we've been married and in ministry for 46 years. We were married in May of 1976 and started ministry in July of 1976 at Bethel Baptist Church in Jamestown, New York, on the very southwestern edge of New York State. And we have a family. We have these lovely 10 grandchildren. Now, I think probably there's some cute kids around here, Wellington, but they all would be 11th place or later as far as cuteness goes. Our newest is little Olive, who is just 2 months old. And our oldest, I can't believe I'm old enough to have a 16-year-old granddaughter, but we delight in all of them. My favorite word in the English language is Papa. I really love being a Papa. They happen by God's providence to be right all near us. So sometimes, believe it or not, they're around a little too much. We like them to go home when they're so close, but we really delight in them. And then one of the unique features in our lives is that 5 years ago, this is Debbie's mom and dad. My folks are with the Lord, both godly, faithful, serving, loving, local church people in a church very much like First Regular Baptist Church here in Wellington. This is Mom and Dad Horton, and they are 93 and 90, becoming quite frail. And so we literally, by several sticks of dynamite, it took a long process to convince them no one out in upstate New York was there to care for them. And we knew they were struggling, becoming very feeble and not able to manage even just the basics of life. So we finally dislodged them. We sold our home. We built a duplex, and so they live on one side of the duplex. We live on the other. And so we care for them as much as we possibly can. Some of you perhaps are in the same situation where you're caring for elderly parents, and we want to honor our father and mother for as long as they live on earth. And I will just weave in a little bit of a personal testimony here that Debbie and I had I believe it or not, I know, at least when Debbie stands by me, I don't look as old as I really am. She colors her hair, and that's not fair, and she has hair, and that's not fair either. But we were 68 years old, I am, and figuring out how to transition from full-time pastoral ministry. And so we had, by a months-long process, just prayed, Debbie and I, talked with a very few people, and finally announced to our church family that we would be leaving ministry as senior pastor there at the end of 2022. And then the opportunity came up after we made that decision. We didn't know what we were going to do. We really needed to keep working, wanted to keep serving. And it was then that the people at the GARBC office began to talk to us about serving and leading the international ministry, what we now call Regular Baptist International. It used to be known as Gospel Literature Services. So I was going to do that. I was going to step down, and I was going to retire, quote unquote, in June of 2022 and start that on behalf of the GARBC. Well then, here's the situation, and you experienced that as well. Make a plan if you want to hear God laugh, because you make a plan, and He says, well, I am sovereign, and I have some different ideas. And so, unfortunately and unexpectedly, there was a vacancy that occurred, a sudden resignation in the office of the National Representative. I graduated from high school in 1972, and the military draft was dismantled just a few years before that. So I escaped the military draft, but the council came to me and said, we are hereby drafting you, and you will go talk to your wife and talk to your church and let them know that you're going to do this for us, and you're going to do this for us immediately to serve in the interim national representative's role. I said, well, let me go ask my wife and find out if she thinks that's a good idea. And then, if necessary, I'll talk to the church. So the next Sunday, we communicated that to the church. And instead of ceasing ministry at Ankeny Baptist Church, where we had been for 23 years, we accelerated that departure to January of 2022 and did double duty for a couple months. And yet, here's the testimony part, that it was a really good, though difficult process for Debbie and me. We didn't know a whole lot. We had to make some life-altering decisions based upon the limited knowledge of that moment. Hebrews 11:8 says, by faith Abraham went, not knowing where he was going. I'm sure I play with that in my mind a little bit. I think that perhaps Abraham asked God, where? And God said, go. Didn't tell him where he just said, you need to go. I'm not going to tell you where. I'll lead you there. So we had to make those decisions. We then also had to understand that God is sovereign and that He cares for our life, and He has the perfect right and authority to alter the course of our life at any time. Does not even need to ask our permission to do so in order to put us in a place where He can best use us. And so we've regularly prayed, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service, and don't be conformed to this age. And he speaks in that latter part, he says, that you may discern or prove that the will of God is good, acceptable, and perfect. Or Psalm 18:30, as for God, His way is perfect. His word is proven. He is a shield to all who trust in Him. And we've just have been able to see God's hand, although I will be very frank with you that my service in this role now for the last 15 months or so was very unexpected, that we have seen the good hand of God for us as a family when we didn't know anything about what we're going to do. So I just challenge you. I risk being a preacher tonight, but it does eke out occasionally. Is God trustworthy? Is he able to? Are you able to give your life to God, even when you don't have every question answered, and trust Him for that moment? And I would affirm that as for God, His way is perfect. His word is proven. We as a couple rejoice in that. I have remarked that though I did not expect to be doing what I'm doing, I've had a blast. Being with churches is just so much fun. Representing the fellowship is such a delight. Helping people understand who we are. Providing leadership in various ways. It's been though I did not desire it nor expect it, it has been just a great joy. And I just want to have you have that testimony about how good God is in our lives. And I know we have experienced that as a family. I began service as the interim national representative in December of 2021. I noted that for 2 months I finished ministry and did double duty, began traveling for the fellowship February of of 2022. Matter of fact, the way my life has been is that we had a farewell service on the last Sunday of January 2022, whatever day that was, and they had a morning service, a dinner, and a big reception thing and everything for us. When they're saying goodbye, they say nice things about you, so it was fun. And that evening at 5 o'clock, I was on a plane to Bob Jones University to begin ministry for the fellowship, and that's just kind of the way it's been. In the 48 weeks from February to December last year, I was in 47 churches, colleges, or association meetings, and that does not include the weeks that every month I spend at least 3 or 4 days on site in the Chicago offices. We still live in Ankeny, and so I need some face time with people. And so it's been a lot of travel. God has been unusually good, and believe it or not, I'm trying to think. I have not been sick in any of that time. I have not had any significant plane difficulties. So God has been just wonderfully good in so many ways. Pastor Alexander noted, I am interim. That is indefinite. When you figure out how long it will be, let me know, because then I'll know. It likely will be a little longer than a little shorter. In my ministry, what I'm doing, I am extending ministry with churches, with associations, with sister ministries. And so just in the last few weeks, I was on the campus of Bob Jones University again, just trying to work with them, speaking in University Chapel, in Seminary Chapel, talking to the seminary leaders particularly, and trying to recruit men for ministry. We have a dearth, literally. I'm going to mention it later. We're entering a crisis in our churches in that we do not have capable, qualified men ready to enter vacant pulpits in our churches. We have churches going 2 and 3, sometimes more years, not being able to find a pastor. So when you think about ways you can pray for us as a fellowship, but you as a church, we need to pray about raising that next generation of leaders for our local churches. So I'm really working in various ways. I oversee the RBM staff. I provide leadership to the fellowship, and the council has given me great latitude in that regard. I represent the fellowship in extensive travel. I haven't even counted, to be honest with you, the number of miles I've flown or driven. It just piles up, and you just do what you need to do. So God has been really good. Oh, I should have tried to stop this. This is all time and sequence. If you're really quick, you could see Pastor Alexander at the annual conference on the front row there. So it's third row he is. He's right towards the front. Here are just some of my friends that I've met, and I keep adding to them. I was just meeting or reacquainting myself with a gentleman here at church who was down at Maranatha Village. We were there last month at their Bible conference ministry, and just made so many new friends, but also got reacquainted with old friends. And it is such a delight to meet such fine servants of Christ. One of the good blessings for our fellowship is that last year we sold our Arlington Heights office. It was 4 times larger than what we needed. When I would visit there, it was like going into a ghost town, because just the vacant offices with remote work capabilities that people have, and then COVID accelerated that. We had a huge building and not using it. But that's happening all over the various industries with a glut of office space, so we weren't sure how that would go. But when God is for us, He does some things that are quite unusual and wonderfully good. We sold the building. We received a cash offer, full price for it. And so that's a great blessing, and really serves as a momentary cushion, but eventually that money will be invested in various forms of ministry and not be located in a piece of property. So we're really glad for that. This is a collage of the 30 people or so and their families who serve for Regular Baptist Ministries. Again, the 2 favorite things that I do is what I'm doing tonight, being able to meet and greet and communicate the message of the fellowship to churches, but also to work with fine people. They have been wonderfully supportive in anything that I've tried to do or needed to do. They have bent over backwards and are wonderfully fine, capable people. As Pastor Alexander noted, he is my boss, and you can see, where are you, Pastor Alexander? Right there he is. And so I genuflect. I salute whenever I see Tom. And all of these men are my friends. They're colleagues in ministry. For 30 plus years I served on this council, and they kicked me off when I became national representative. And so these men are really good, godly counselors in so many different ways. We are 91 years old as a fellowship. Is there anyone here who is 91 or above? That we have some 91 years old. So you were around. We know you were born 1932 or earlier. We won't get into specifics. Just say that it was 1932 or before. We are regular. Now, your church, as I have already noted, you don't likely need a primer on this, but let me remind you that it was in the 1700s when there were irregular Baptists. There were Baptists that were departing either in small steps, but sometimes in very large steps, from fidelity to the gospel. And so Baptist pastors began to write, and they began to attach an adjective to themselves as Baptists. And they would use it with a lowercase r. We are regular Baptists. We are Baptists that believe what the Bible has always taught, salvation by grace through faith in the person of Jesus Christ. Over time, that adjective became a title. And so when our forefathers began our fellowships, they then identified themselves in order to differentiate themselves from irregular Baptists, that we are regular Baptists. And so it is indeed, I will say it again, a delight to be at First Regular Baptist Church of Wellington. I want you to know I am a regular Baptist. I pastored a church whose name simply was Regular Baptist Church. So I can wear the title proudly. That was Regular Baptist Church of Elmira, New York, that I pastored for 6 years. We were born out of the fundamentalist modernist battles of the early 1900s. I would encourage you, if you can do some reading, maybe David Beale's book on fundamentalism perhaps is the best volume that helps describe the fundamentalist movement and the controversies there. Dr. Ketchum's book is a wonderful book to reread and identify. We don't really understand the difficulty. Now here's oral quiz time. I have no prizes if you know the answers to this. Does anyone here know when the Southern Baptist Convention began? What year? It began in 1847. 1847, and of course organized evangelical, but largely organized around the issue of slavery. That they thought that slavery was an acceptable institution in American society. Does anyone know when the Northern Baptist Convention began? 1907. Not until 1907. And guess what was unusual about the Northern Baptist Convention? It had no statement of faith. And the reason why, you need to understand, and it happens today, and the issues, it's the same people, different generations later, wearing different clothes, but the issues remain the same. If you don't want to be pinned down about a specific doctrinal view, then you simply will have no doctrinal statement and everything's okay. You don't want to be specific about what you believe, because then people are going to know exactly what's going on. And so in a Northern Baptist Convention annual meeting, a fundamentalist stood up and said, I propose that we accept the New Hampshire Confession of Faith as our statement of faith. Now, if you know anything about statements of faith, you will remember that the New Hampshire Confession of Faith is a thoroughly biblical, evangelical doctrine that communicates the essence of the faith. The modernists wanted nothing to do with that. And so a modernist stood up, and I am only quoting tonight. I didn't bring my Bible, but he held up his Bible and said, I propose a substitute motion. And the substitute motion is that the New Testament scriptures will serve as our statement of faith. All right? Now, you need to understand that the modernist did not believe in the inspiration of Scripture, did not believe that New Testament taught the virgin birth of Christ, that New Testament did not teach salvation by grace through faith, did not teach the necessity of justification by grace through faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, and denied all the essential doctrines of the faith. But also, you're the country bumpkin preacher from First Regular Baptist Church of Wellington, and you've got to go home and tell your church family that you voted against the New Testament as your statement of faith. Now, they should have seen through the ruse. That motion, that substitute motion passed, and you get an idea of the theological turmoil that existed to the point finally when our forefathers said, this denomination, though there are believers in it. And I would want you to understand that. Not to say that everyone in that denomination was a lost person. But this denomination is becoming largely apostate. It is accepting aberrant theological views, and we can no longer fellowship here. And so they withdrew. One of the unique features of our movements, not only did they withdraw from the fellowship, they started their own fellowships, and they required, if you will join us, you must separate from all forms of apostasy. And so it was a clear demarcation between truth and error, between the gospel and the false gospel. So our forefathers paid a great price. Sometimes pastors lost pensions, investments that the denomination held. Some churches lost buildings that were owned by the denomination. There was a great personal difficulty of the rending of relationships and friendships that occurred. I would remind you, however, I'm reminded of Jesus when he said, listen, I didn't come to bring peace, I came to bring division. The gospel will even separate mother and father, and sometimes brothers and sisters. And the reason is because truth, the gospel, is always paramount, is always important, and must never be sacrificed simply to maintain a personal relationship. And so many of them experienced great difficulty. I would remind us, I'll move rather quickly, and I do see there's a clock back there. I'll look at it once in a while, and then you'll think I'm paying attention. We've always been gospel-centered. We've always been focused upon the gospel of Christ, and though we have altered our doctrinal statement, it has only been to enhance it or to add some issues that our forefathers never realized we might need to address, such as human sexuality, LGBTQ plus issues. All of those things we've had to clarify, but we have not changed our doctrine in any way. Our work is this: a renewed focus on church revitalization and church planning. Now, if I could tell you statistics, if I will just speak of the state of Iowa. Iowa is that other 3-vowel, 1-consonant state. Ohio is not the only one. Iowa. There are 100 churches in our state fellowship. 25 of them are 25 people and less, including children. 25 others are 50 people and under, including children. So you are looking at churches that half of the churches are not viable, really, as a long-term ministry. They're not able, often, to call pastors. They don't support missionaries. They are not able to have men serving as deacons. They can barely pay enough to keep the heat and the lights on, let alone to do any significant outreach ministries in their church. We have some bellwether churches in the state of Iowa. You may have heard of the names of Paul Tassel and Ken and Carl Elgina and some of these people, and they pastored large, thriving ministries, and those ministries have dwindled to 100 people or so. And so you're looking at the need, and you understand that our culture, which used to be relatively, and I say this depending on geography, relatively neutral to the church, that day is gone. If things continue as they continue in the political world, it very well may be in 25 to 50 years that churches like this will be legislated out of existence. And they'll do that through removing your tax-exempt status and putting all kinds of financial requirements on you because you don't toe the cultural line. You see, there's a great need for churches to be strong and healthy. And please understand that a strong church is not necessarily a large church, and a small church is not necessarily unhealthy. The marks of a healthy church are that we have pastors and deacons, and we meet regularly for worship and edification, that we're reaching our lost community, we're seeing people baptized, we are able to support worldwide missions, and all of the different rhythms of life that comprise what a healthy church is. And we are pouring all kinds of energy and investments to help churches become healthier and to also encourage church planting ministries. If you could put on your prayer list, just personally, you need to pray that God would raise up church planting missionaries in North America, that we could re-church America. And that churches, I regularly pray through a whole list of churches. I pray through all of the GARBC directory in 2.5 months and pray by name for pastors and people. And I pray for churches that need leadership. And I know many are struggling. And so the churches that you are familiar with in the Hebron Fellowship, you need to be praying that God, we are not in competition with each other. And if we think we're competing with our Baptist brothers, then we need to get a life. We're not competing. We need to encourage each other and help each other. We are assisting churches to be healthy and strong. When I've answered the question, what is the GARBC? What is Regular Baptist Ministries? I put it this way. We are an association of churches, or Baptist churches, that assist churches to fulfill the Great Commission. The Great Commission, of course, make disciples. How? Matthew 28, by going. Folks, the best, most effective evangelism ministry of First Regular Baptist Church. Sorry, Pastor Alexander, almost forgot. The effective evangelistic ministry of First Regular Baptist Church is not a program. It is rather you as a church being God's witness, building relationship with lost people in your community wherever you go, and being able to communicate the gospel of Christ so that people come to Christ through your presence in the community. That's the Great Commission. That's the beginning of it, by going to them. Long gone is the day when you could put on a vibrant church service and sinners would walk in off the street and get saved. Now, that may still occasionally happen, but it's not normal. How do lost people come to Christ? By going to them. There's a revolutionary idea I have found in my life in ministry across 46 years of ministry. More people get saved when I witness than when I don't. It's really interesting. Now, I know God is sovereign and God saves, but it puts the onus where it belongs. How do you make a disciple? Folks, on your prayer list, you need to be, by name, you need to be identifying people that you are seeking to build a relationship with them in order to share Christ with them. And pray for them by name. I've tried in our neighborhood. I don't know all my neighbors by name, so I've just learned I can go to the tax assessor page. I can find out how much they paid for the house. I can know how much they paid in taxes last year, and I can also know their name. And I get their name and address, and I pray for them by name. Because I want to know who they are to be able to share Christ with them. And so that's what we're all about. We want to help churches make disciples. Of course, to finish that, Matthew 28, we do it by baptizing them, by identifying them with Christ and His church. And we do it by teaching them to observe all things. We throw the book at them. And that never ends. It's a constant process. I would remind, and Pastor Alexander already noted this, we are not, underscore, I should have put this in really big font, we are not a denomination. Denomination connotes authority. I would remind you, you don't exist for us. We, as a fellowship, exist for you. And we pour all of our efforts and all of our energy and all of our focus to help churches thrive in ministry for Christ. And we don't supplant the church. God is not building a fellowship of churches necessarily. He is building His church. And the gates of hell will not prevail against it. That's what we are. further than modifiers are necessary, we've always been Bible-centered. We've been people of the book. We have always been Christ-exalting, that in everything Christ might have preeminence. We've always been gospel-proclaiming. I would remind myself constantly, please understand how God chooses to save sinners. It pleases God by the foolishness of preaching to save those that believe. It's so necessary. The last 7 months of my ministry in Ankeny Baptist Church, God gave me the opportunity to help an ailing church. Our church came alongside Northridge Baptist Church on the north side of Des Moines. And so I would go down and preach at 9:30 in the morning. I would scramble out of there, and I would arrive at Ankeny Baptist Church and pretend like I'd been there all the time and slip into that service. I sat on a steering committee to try to help them to see what they needed to do. And somehow that church had become totally closed down, and it was a nice little spiritual clique where they had fun together, but they had no contact with their community of witness for Christ. Now you tell me, is that church going to grow and thrive? Answer, no, not at all. And so it's through the preaching of the gospel. I would just encourage you. I know we all get tongue-tied. We all get a little nervous when we think about communicating the gospel of Christ. I put it this way. I was a little while ago in an airport. It seems like I'm always in an airport lately. There was an elderly couple nearby. Our plane got delayed. And so we had to change gates. It was going to be 2 or 3 hours before the plane finally left. And this couple's easily in their mid-80s. And if you've ever done that, when you're at the gate waiting, nobody's talking to anybody else except they're in their family groups. As soon as they announce the flight's canceled or delayed, we all start talking with each other because we're all in the same boat together. And so everybody starts trying to figure out, how do we do? So I just said, God prompted me, go help that couple. So I just started helping that couple. So I said, let me help take your baggage and let me help get you to the next gate. It was quite a ways away. It was going to be over dinner time. Let me go scout and get some food for you, because you're going to need some food. I was just trying to find some ways that I could help them. And you know what God did, of course, that in serving, identifying the needs of some people around me, God gave me 45 minutes to share the gospel with them through personal testimony and just sharing. Left them some literature. I wish I could say they came to Christ that moment, but I at least moved things forward as far as possible. That's what you folks need to do. Find people you can serve. Find ways you can connect with them and communicate Christ to them. We've always been gospel proclaiming. And I will be honest with you, our lack of growth is because it's a lack of our proclamation. I mean, is that too simple? How will First Regular Baptist Church of Wellington grow? Answer, by sharing Christ with people. That's just really, really simple, really basic. We've been God-honoring. I must scoot along. Believe it or not, we actually work together with other Baptists. If you're a biblical Baptist, you don't even need to say that you're independent, because a Baptist, by definition, is independent. But believe it or not, here's what I posit. Wherever you have more than one church in the New Testament, they're always working in relationship together. And so the churches are sending missionaries. They're giving offerings. They're moving money back and forth to help the suffering saints in Jerusalem. And the church is existing, yes, as independent, autonomous works of God, and yet they are involved in ministry with other churches. And so, believe it or not, Baptists can work together. And when they work together, most of the time we can accomplish more. Not all the time, but most of the time. And so we resource local churches. That's a large issue, or we leverage the efforts of many local churches to accomplish more. And we do that through our chaplaincy ministry. We do it through our international fellowship. We do it through our discipleship literature, through Regular Baptist Press. We do it through what is known as Regular Baptist Generate, which is our church revitalization and church planting ministry. This is a ministry that'll come alongside a church and a pastor and provide momentary but ongoing tutoring and help and mentoring to try to help that church really move forward in ministry for Christ. We can provide financial grants to church that need some facility updates. We can provide some funds for internships to allow a pastor to be trained as to how to lead his church forward. And so that is the ministry of RB Generate. Then we encourage and provide accountability. Believe it or not, your two pastors need accountability. They need the encouragement. I illustrate one of the great benefits of my ministry has been the different men that God has used. And really, all through my 46 years of ministry, I can honestly say I never had a bad group of deacons. We just had fine, godly men. And they were often the men who, at great personal sacrifice, would minister to me and give me encouragement. And even when necessary, I can remember a deacon coming into my office one day, as he regularly did every Monday morning, and spent an hour with me just to review the day, encourage me, find out how I was doing. He came to me and said, hey, Pastor, did you realize what you said yesterday? And he repeated what I said, which I won't repeat today. And I said, did I really say that? Yeah, you did. And I needed that accountability. I needed someone to come along and encourage me. It's really interesting that we really do that. And I do that through my ministry. That's one of the fun things I do. I mean, I delight in meeting with your pastor at different times. A couple of weeks ago, we were both in the council meetings for Baptist missions, and those are all really important. I do what are called INR Connects, so that online I had a pastor from Central Africa, I had a pastor from Hawaii, and 4 pastors from the States, all on a Zoom call, just to try to encourage each other and acquaint each other with our ministries. We do it through our annual conference ministry, which this year is way far away in Salem, Oregon, and we do it through pastoral cohorts. Really many things that we do to try to encourage churches and pastors. I don't know everything. Pastor Alexander doesn't know everything. I know committee meetings sometimes get a bad rap, but when we have a heart for God, and we have needs or plans that need to be made, quite literally, when we think with other people, we think better than we do alone. Amen. And so we literally do think and work together. People have often asked, why a fellowship of churches? Precisely because of this reason. Because we don't know everything. And I need the investment and the help of others in our efforts to disciple. Believe it or not, coming down the home stretch, how can you help? You can pray. I would ask you, everything on the table back there is you may take except for the display itself. Don't take that. There are, I think, a few copies of the Baptist Bulletin, but I'd appreciate it. I have some business cards back there. I don't have a quote-unquote missionary prayer card, but take that and put it on your refrigerator and just pray for Debbie and me. That would be, we would really appreciate that. For 46 years I pastored, and I never realized how important it was when missionaries would come to our church and I would communicate to them our constant, regular prayer on a rhythm and cycle. Now I know, whenever I travel, people come up to me and I don't know who they are from Adam. And they say, we pray for you regularly, every week, every month. I have people that pray for me every day. And so not only for me, but also for our fellowship. Be informed. Subscribe to the Baptist Bulletin. If your church does not provide it, you do provide it, and so that's a really great tool. A new issue, by the way, is just gone to the printer, so it'll be out shortly. Use our resources. Very important you do that. Reach out. One of the neat things I've done in this ministry, I've reached out, believe it or not, to Baptists who are not affiliated with the regular Baptist ministries, because we need to reach out to them and encourage them. Invest in training others. Here's that need. We as local churches have really dropped the ball, I think. And seminaries and colleges have filled a vacuum that needs to be filled by local churches. Local churches need to be primary in raising up a new generation of servants for Christ. And you never know what God will use, but I would encourage you to challenge your young people to encourage them to aspire by a godly life to pursue ministry if God will. And then if it's His desire to lower your sights, that's fine. There's one occupation God says you ought to desire. If you desire the office of a bishop, you desire a good thing. 1 Timothy 3:1. I can remember just anecdotally, what are the factors that bring you to this point in life? I had a faithful mom and dad. My dad prepared for pastoral ministry, never was called into ministry. So he served in a church like this for all of his life. They poured into my life. I'm the third of 5 children. I had a godly pastor who was a teenager. He really challenged us young men to think about, at least pray that God might call you into ministry. It's also interesting. I had a 4th grade public school teacher. Her name was Mary Shellhammer. And she was a member of our local church. Remember those poor cards and the reports at the end of the quarters? And then, David would be a good student if he could only pay attention. Some of those kind of comments. I had a number of those. On my 4th grade report card at the end of the year, Mary Shellhammer wrote, "David would make a good preacher someday." You don't know what you will do to put the seed into somebody's heart and mind to aspire to serve God in a way that really is unusual. You understand that God has chosen what is insignificant and despised in the world, what is viewed as nothing. And He does that to bring to nothing what is viewed as something, so that no one may boast in His presence. I'm quoting 1 Corinthians 1. He says, "It is from Him that we are in Christ Jesus. He became wisdom from God for us, our righteousness, sanctification, and redemption, in order that, as it is written, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord." God has often taken very common people of rather ordinary abilities and magnified His grace in using them in ministry service. Communicate. That is, be good ambassadors. I hope that you are good ambassadors for First Regular Baptist Church of Wellington. Don't speak badly of your church in the community. Who would think of doing that? Well, speak well of your fellowship too. We're not a perfect fellowship. I'm part of it, so we're not perfect. But there are so many wonderful positives that we can have a wonderful positive testimony about not only our church, but also our fellowship. Give, and I would thank you. You have given in a way that is rather extraordinary. And you do that when you allow your pastor to serve as an administrator for the fellowship. And I, as national representative, interim national representative, that's a real ministry of giving on the part of churches, because it takes time. It takes a lot of work, doesn't it, Tom? It's not just going to a meeting once in a while. It's walking through some really, really challenging things. So you can give, obviously, financially, but give in ministry. And then, of course, affiliate. That is, we don't become members as churches to a fellowship. Rather, we affiliate with a fellowship and love to draw churches into fellowship. Do you have any questions? Because I'll stop here. Or let me, I forgot, I had one more slide. What are our needs? People ask me, what's the state of our fellowship? And I always answer, well, what's the state of our churches? Because we are as healthy as our churches are. No more, no less. And so we really need to pray for the health of our churches. We need to pray that God will raise up a generation of men called by God to serve in pastoral ministry. And so these are some of the needs that I would encourage you to pray about. I know I've thrown them up there very quickly. Do you have any questions? I'll ask Pastor Alexander to answer all of the hard ones. Have I created any questions in your mind about our fellowship? I've stunned them into silence. Again, let me share with you how glad we are. I have mentioned it several times. It is such a ball to be with churches. this is salt of the earth here. This is your church is probably, by the way, it's probably a little larger than the normal church in our regular Baptist fellowship. And so to meet with you and encourage you and tell you, keep on in ministry for Christ. I often pray for myself. Paul prayed for the Thessalonian church. I pray that God may make you worthy of his calling and may fulfill your every resolve for good and work of faith by his power, so that Christ might be glorified by you and you by him, according to the grace of our God and the Lord Jesus Christ. So I pray that's true for First Regular Baptist Church. Last chance for question.
Could you explain the relationship between the National GARBC, the OARBC, and the Hebron Fellowship? We're all one big thing, right?
No. There is almost identical overlap in those, but there is no organic tie between the national fellowship, between the state fellowship, and between a local fellowship like the Hebron Fellowship. The OARBC is not the state chapter of the GARBC. Now that's good at times because we're independent Baptists. It's also our Achilles heel at times because there are occasions where we really do need to work together and do it in a way that does not infringe the autonomy of those organizations, but rather does collectively work together. And there are some things that state associations do better than a national association. And there are some things that a national association can do that a state fellowship is not able to do. And so there really is not an organic tie, although you'll find, and I think Pastor Alexander has been in this case where you've served on the national council, probably on the state council, and maybe even on the Hebron Fellowship.
Not all at the same time, yes.
Yeah, so, good.
Are you in all 50 states?
Not all 50 states. We're largely a eastern and north Midwest, and it's a great need. For example, we have, I think, 4 churches in Texas. How many people are in Texas, and how many Southern Baptist churches, for example, are in Texas? So it's a great need to be able to reproduce ourselves into various geographical areas. We're really targeting a lot in some of the greater metropolitan areas in some of our church planning ministries. So that's a bit of our thinking there.
As a permanent director is looked for a representative, what are ways we can pray specifically about that transition and what's being searched for in that part?
The biggest things you could pray for, matter of fact, we have a meeting this week. We have two positions that we need to hire right immediately. You may be familiar that the director of Regular Baptist Press left in a very amicable circumstances. And so we're hoping that very soon we can hire a new director of RBP, and also there's another key administrator that we need to hire in the office. We can pray that God would, it's likely that we will not have a nominee for the national representative's office can only be elected at the annual meeting in June. And so it's very likely that will not occur by this June. And so I'll be serving beyond that time. And so pray that God gives wisdom once they begin that process, that men of God, obviously, you know, that when, and how do I gracefully address this, that when a man, a pastor, be it a pastor or a national representative, disqualifies himself in ministry, that leaves a really significant smudge upon the ministry. That's a challenge. So we really need to find a man that will be committed to our fellowship, communicate the values of our fellowship, be solid and steady, and will be there for the long haul. It's just a real challenge. So I would say pray as they begin that search that man would be identified. Did I see another hand over here?
I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it. There's a lot of churches that do not have the term regular Baptist in their name, such as probably Elyria, Camden. I've at least not heard of it that way. Are they regular
If they are part of our fellowship, yes. And because they hold to the same beliefs and they have gladly joined and affiliated with our fellowship. And you understand, and I would want to say this correctly, just a little bit of my personal history. I had a friend, quote unquote, that's used in air quotes, in high school. I went to public high school, and we attended Awana clubs together as boys, and he was from an unchurched family, never, to my knowledge, came to Christ. And so we played basketball together in high school, and so in order to mock me as a Christian, all through my senior year in high school, he never called me by my given name, David. He called me Baptist. That's all he ever referred to me. He said, always called me Baptist. I said, well, that's what I am. I guess it's okay. We understand, don't you, that the title Baptist is relatively recent in church history. There have been groups who have believed what Baptists believed from the very founding of the church. And so, for example, I illustrated this way that just 5 miles away from us in Ankeny was First Baptist Church of Des Moines. It was located in Johnston, New York. Go figure, but it was the First Baptist Church of Des Moines. And they were a ardently liberal American Baptist churches of the USA. Now, they had Baptist in their name, but we had absolutely nothing to do with them. So it's not always the name that matters. And so that church, though it bore the name Baptist, was not an authentic Baptist church. And we gladly fellowship with those who claim that identity.
There's a lot of churches that take the word Baptist out of their name. Church where my son goes, it used to be called the Valleydale Baptist Church. Now it's just called the Valleydale Church. But down in the corner, of course, it's Southern Baptist Convention. And a lot of the Southern Baptist churches, I think, have taken that word out because of the association of that name as a stigma.
Yep.
Unfortunately.
It tends to be a fad. And let me just put it this way. I have a given name, and I'm glad that I, through life, have not been known as, hey, boy, as a generic name. My name is David. I'm named after my middle name. I'm David Eldred. That carries value and meaning to me. That differentiates me from other Stropes. And so I've gladly taken my given name and my surname as part of my identity. I think that no matter what we do, however we are known, that we communicate without shame the gospel of Christ, and that we communicate with no apology, that we are Bible-believing Baptists who love God, love our neighbors, and are doing all we can to reach them for Christ. That's what I hope that we are. I probably better stop. It's getting a little late. I don't know when you typically end. Not that I saw. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Strope. It is a privilege to be a part of an organization like this. Interestingly, our church was founded in 1890 with the name First Regular Baptist